Colorado will host at least two high-profile federal races for U.S. Senator Michael Bennet running for re-election and Representative Mike Coffman facing a challenge in the 6th District from former State Senator Morgan Carroll. David, in both these races, we have a real title fight with Morgan Carroll and Mike Coffman, two seasoned campaign veterans. They both like to campaign. It's Morgan Carroll's from Aurora. That's going to be a pretty big fight. And Michael Bennet, described throughout 2015 as a vulnerable candidate, but we still haven't seen a major name come out as a Republican nominee. There are certainly Republican candidates, but we haven't seen the kind of the equivalent of a Cory Gardner whispered that would happen with Mark Udall. This time next year, what do you think we'll be talking about both those races?
I think the Carroll-Coffman race is going to be close and very well fought on both sides. I think you've got two outstanding candidates, both of whom, by the way, they would also be good enough to be U.S. Senate candidates and run very strong statewide races. This will be one of the top U.S. House races in the United States. If there were a wave election, like in 2008, where Obama carried a lot of down-ticket Democrats to victory, I think Morgan Carroll would win that race. I don't see the race developing that way. It could be a wave against the Democrats, depending on if Mrs. Clinton has a tough challenger like, say, Marco Rubio. I think that might give Coffman maybe an easier victory than we're expecting right now. But it's going to be tough and well fought on both sides. On Michael Bennet, sort of the worst thing that could happen for him is he just runs against a generic Republican. He didn't win that race back in 2010 because people said we want you to be senator. It was more that he had managed to terrify enough swing voters about Ken Buck. The incessant fundraising emails that all the candidates are sending out. Bennett's emails are all about, if you lose me, the Democrats might lose the Senate. The Koch brothers are like so evil, and they're coming to take over everything. Very little positive about himself. His numbers, does he deserve to be reelected, are quite low. So if you just get a competent Republican candidate who maybe ideally stays out of the limelight in some ways, that could be very dangerous for him.
Eric, hopefully you and I will be talking to candidates both in the 6th Congressional District and the U.S. Senate race, at least in the middle of 2016. What do you think about the idea that we just had from David? If you're Michael Bennet at this stage of the game without any real high-profile thinking, I'm not trying to insult the current candidates, but even folks who follow it are still trying to figure out a little bit more about them. Do you think Michael Bennet is happy at this stage of the game?
I would go out on a limb. I mean, having said the year's unpredictable as my one word, my prediction would be that both of these incumbents, both Michael Bennet and Mike Coffman, are going to be hard to dislodge, that they have the advantages. Let me go in the opposite order and do CD6 first. I've heard this talk now for several cycles about this being one of the hot races nationally. I mean, there was so much buildup around Andrew Romanoff that this was going to be the congressional race to watch in the country. Obviously, it fizzled. Coffman won by 9 or 10 points. I think it was double digits, if I recall right. Morgan Carroll, in some respects, fits the district better than Andrew Romanoff did. Mike Coffman strikes me as the Republican Ed Perlmutter, that is a very competitive swing district if it was ever an open district. But as long as they're in that seat, there is a tough burden to dislodge them. On this Senate race, the most interesting news has been in the last week or so when the name of a young state legislator from Jefferson County, John Kaiser, has been floated, and he's apparently going to make a decision after the first of the year as to whether he enters the race. Clearly, there are a whole lot of Republicans who see him as possibly the salvation because the rest of the field is a nowhere field. No one there, I don't think most analysts or Republican politicos take seriously as being a potential plausible candidate to bring Bennet down. Kaiser would not be able to clear the field as Cory Gardner did. I mean, when Cory raised his hand and said, "I'm running," the waters parted, he cleared the field. John Kaiser does not have that kind of clout. So there will be a competitive primary. There'll be Tim Neville from the Tea Party side running. There'll be others. If Kaiser could emerge from that primary, he could give Bennet a race. That said, let's not forget that Cory Gardner, being the best Republican candidate on that bench, running in the best year Republicans are going to see, 2014, that they're going to see for some period of time, only won that Senate race by 1.9 points. Michael Bennet is not as polarized as Mark Udall was, and he's running in a presidential year, which works for Democrats much better than the off year does. It's going to be hard. It's a hard scenario to imagine that Michael Bennet doesn't continue to serve in the U.S. Senate.
Penn, the local federal races, U.S. Senate race, Congressional District 6. Do you predict any surprises?
Possibly in CD6, but I think, interestingly enough, I think part of it turns on the Senate race. I think what's happening in the Senate race is, if you're Michael Bennet, I think you're guardedly optimistic, but you're a little uneasy right now because you don't quite know how the national conversation is going to play out, and who you have a pretty good sense Hillary will be the Democratic nominee, but the race is really going to be defined by who the Republican nominee is. And I'm still not eliminating the possibility that it's Donald Trump, which just makes this whole thing a very weird, unpredictable election season. One thing, a couple things Michael Bennet has going for him. He's not made any major gaffes, and I think that some folks felt that Udall was guilty of that. And the other thing is, remember, Bennet was part of the Gang of Eight. He is sort of known as the moderate consensus builder who crosses the aisle and tries to find solutions to a host of different things. Whether you agree with those solutions or not, at least within the Washington sphere and beyond, he's perceived as that person who's trying to work in a bipartisan fashion, which I think resonates well with Coloradans, and it's where a lot of Coloradans are, which is why we're a purple state, because often we vote with who the candidate is. The national tide will affect us in many instances, but I think Bennet fits Colorado right now, which is interesting because he's not from Colorado, but I think he's attuned to Colorado in terms of how he's positioned himself politically. I don't think Kaiser gets there, and I don't think any of the other Republican candidates do either, which is unfortunate because if there were a stronger U.S. Senate candidate on the R side of the aisle, that would give Mike Coffman an additional boost, because I agree with Eric that the district is competitive, but if you're an incumbent, you have an advantage. I think Coffman's helped significantly if he has a strong Republican on the U.S. Senate ticket, and it doesn't look like he's going to get that. So Mike's going to have to work very hard again, and Morgan's going to be formidable. Don't know if she'll win, but she's going to be formidable.
Patty, wrap it up for us.
Colorado may be a purple state, but I think we're going to get there in 2016 by being black and blue and bloody. It is going to be an ugly, ugly campaign season, but I think by the time it's all over, ironically, we will have the two incumbents back. Going back to Mike Coffman, even though Morgan Carroll is a really interesting, strong candidate, will be a great campaigner, I think Mike Coffman's military background will play really well again in 2016. We cannot forget it's going to be a scary year, and if it's truly a Trumptious year with Trump on the ballot, we're going to be hearing a lot of that drum beating. With Bennet, even though there's all the money that's out there that people are talking about for Kaiser, it was rumored he's been offered, we promised $3 million in a campaign chest. I heard $2 million promised to another candidate. Michael Bennet has raised plenty of money, and he hasn't done a lot of missteps. I mean, he does look like a consensus builder, and I think in a Trumptious year, that's still going to look okay. So at the end of the day, I think we'll still have those two, but we are going to come out bruised.